Okay, we'll begin the city council special meeting for Monday, September 19th. Approval of the agenda.
Second?
All in favor?
Yes. Yeah.
We're getting good at that part. Okay, public comment for anybody who has something that is not on the topic of the hearing tonight. You're welcome to make a comment on something else. Just have to ask. Oh, Roseanne Dorsey? Her hand raised.
Oh, no, I lowered my hand. I just couldn't hear anything initially. So I'm good. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Roseanne. Okay, last call. Okay, thank you. We will move on to our discussion tonight, which is planning commission decision to deny a conditional use partition. Jeff.
Yes, I'll just read straight from the staff report because it gives the background and summary. Cannon Beach Planning Commission rendered the decision to deny the conditional use request for partition in the wetland overlay zone by Jamie Lerma on behalf of Patrick Dave LLC at the corner of Forest Lawn Road and South Hemlock Street, tax lot 4100, map 51030 DA at its July 28th, 2022 regularly scheduled Planning Commission meeting. The PC's findings are attached. Mr. Lerma requests a review of the decision and the application received August 25th, 2022 within the 14 consecutive calendar days appeal period from the date the final order was signed. City Council is to hold, or they held a scope of review and decided to limit the discussion with regards to the applicant's proposed stormwater management method, which will in effect drain the wetland, as the Planning Commission said. A summary, the Planning Commission's findings and this fact of decision to deny the application for petition of the subject property are based on three main findings. First, the PC finds that due to the plat restriction, which was replaced on the plat during the 2000 petition plat, access to parcels 1, 2, and 3 is restricted to Forest Lawn Road only until such future time that said restriction is modified by the city of Cannon Beach. The upland areas where development is proposed is inaccessible. Without the removal of the access restriction, the property is limited to access via Forest Lawn Road. Second, the Planning Commission finds that there is no evidence that a demand exists for this type of housing at this location, which is the litmus test for availability of other appropriately zoned sites, particularly those not requiring conditional use approval, and the desirability of other suitably zoned sites for the use. The Planning Commission finds it disingenuous to consider all housing types as needed housing, as defined in state statute, when what is proposed does not meet the housing mix and type needs identified in the city's own housing report. City of Cannon Beach Affordable Housing Task Force Report on Findings and Deliberation, Affordable Housing Needs and Assessment Implementation Plan, dated 2016. Cannon Beach Affordable Housing Report. With the growing shortage of land in the city of Cannon Beach and the geographical constraints on available surrounding lands, every home that doesn't meet the middle housing needs, such as smaller homes, apartments, multiplexes, duplex homes, etc., displaces homes that could meet such needs. End quote. The city's land use attorney, Bill Kbeisman, has continually stated that LUBA has upheld the state's understanding of needed housing to be all housing, regardless of whether the jurisdiction believes it is needed or not, whether due to housing cost, type, or mix. The state has considered all housing to be needed housing. However, in 2017, state legislature made a fundamental change in the statute through SB 1051, and Senate Bill 1051 amended the statute and made the requirement for clear and objective standards applicable to the development of all housing, not just needed housing on buildable lands. Furthermore, the state LUBA, Land Use Board of Appeal, has also stated that under ORS 197.3074, Clear and objective standards are required to be applied where housing is a permitted use. The Oregon land use system is premised on the idea that the uses allowed on property are specifically defined in the local government's land use regulations, which set forth the uses that are allowed on property. The local government may decide what uses are permitted or not in any particular zone, and for subdivisions may set certain standards such as minimum lot sizes and similar development requirements. However, once those standards are set, property owners have the right to pursue those uses that are allowed in the zone, and the city is not free to decide in an ad hoc manner that even though a property is zoned for a particular use, that in the case of a request for that use, it will not be allowed. Third, the commission finds that what wasn't taken into account in the applicant's presentation, but which the commission finds compelling, is that the cumulative removal of stormwater from these uplands proposed by the utility plan will continue to degrade the historic adjacent wetland. The stormwater removal plan presented by the applicant will in effect drain the wetland. The Planning Commission recognized the fact that evidence has made it clear the wetlands are essential to the health and viability of our community, and that's end quote. Although a wetland lot of record under Cannon Beach Municipal Code 1743-25 contains language that has been considered by the commission to permit a property owner a minimum of one dwelling unit on a wetland lot of record, there is no indication that the wetland lot of record provision is intended to set a maximum level of development on the property. CBMC 1743-40I and 45I conditionally allows subdivisions in both the designated wetland and the designated buffer area of a wetland. So as noted above, if the subdivision application otherwise complies with all applicable criteria, the Planning Commission would be required to approve the subdivision that's proposed for a wetland lot of record. In other words, this application has proposed no development in the wetland or buffer areas, and as such, whether one dwelling or multiple dwellings would allow for up to approximately 24,000 square feet of impervious area or 50% lot coverage under Cannon Beach Municipal Code 1714.40B6C, where lot area means the total area of a lot measured in a horizontal plane within the lot boundary lines, exclusive of public and private roads, except that measurement of lot area shall not include portions of a lot located west of the Oregon coordinate line. That impervious surface would require the owner under Cannon Beach Municipal Code 13-1650 to maintain non-public storm drainage facilities on his or her property so as to prevent flooding or damage to other property not owned or controlled by the person responsible, and to prevent injury to any person on property not owned or controlled by the person responsible. This stormwater runoff of the uplands area of the property would not include any drainage of any wetland or buffer areas. And that's the end of the staff report.
Okay, my apology, Jeff. I forgot to make my statement. This is a hearing regarding the appeal requested by Patrick and Dave LLC of the Planning Commission's denial of P 2201 and CU 2202. Jamie Lerma. On behalf of Patrick and Dave LLC, request for a partition and a conditional use permit for a 3-lot partition on the wetland overlay zone. The property is located at the corner of Forest Lawn Road and South Hemlock, tax lot 04100, map 51030 DA in a residential medium density R2 zone. First, I need to ask, does anyone object to the jurisdiction of the City Council to hear this appeal at this time? Does any counselor believes he or she has a personal bias to declare? Does any counselor believes he or she has a conflict of interest? Has any counselor had any ex parte contacts or made a site visit?
Site visit.
On the site visit, okay. And there was correspondence that was recently posted, or is there anything new beyond that?
I saw it come in.
Just the new wetland from the applicant and the others. You sent those.
Yeah, when I sent it to you.
Okay.
Now we jump to where Jeff just did his stuff on the staff report. Do you have anything to add for the staff report?
No.
Okay. I will call for public testimony. The appeal will be reviewed under Cannon Beach Municipal Code, section 1743-040, conditional uses and activities permitted in the wetlands. 1743-045, conditional uses and activities permitted in wetland buffer areas. And 1604-130, subdivisions applicable standards. Pertinent criteria to be considered are noted in the staff reports. Arguments must be delivered towards those criteria or other criteria in the comprehensive plan or municipal code which the person testifying believes to have applied to the decision. Failure to raise an issue accompanied by statements or evidence sufficient to afford the decision maker and the parties an opportunity to respond to the issue precludes appeal based on that issue. Persons who testify shall first receive recognition from the mayor, state their full name and mailing address, and if appearing in a representative capacity, identify whom they represent. New evidence is generally not allowed, except that evidence may be submitted regarding whether the applicant proposed stormwater management method will, in effect, drain the wetland. Okay. Is there a presentation by the appellant?
Yeah, I think that would be,
Matthew Robinson.
yeah, I think it's, we can ask Matt if it's him or Renee.
Hi, this is Renee France. It will actually be Reed Stapleton that will be providing the presentation. And if we can have John Van Stavern added as a presenter as well, that would be helpful.
Hi, thank you. My name is Reed Stapleton. I'm with Dow, 309 Southwest 6th Avenue, Portland, Oregon, 97204. And I appreciate your time tonight. I do have a PowerPoint prepared, and just as a sort of a overview of what I intend to cover relative to the kind of rules of the road with the appeal hearing is I'm going to briefly give a brief overview of the project and a summary of what we submitted in response to the Planning Commission's findings as our appeal request. And then at the conclusion of my presentation, I'm going to hand things off to John Van Stavern with Pacific Habitat Services. John is a wetland scientist who has over 20 years of history with this site in particular, is very familiar with the conditions of the site, and can specifically address this new issue that came up in the final deliberation by Planning Commission and in their decision regarding a concern about dewatering of the wetland. So with that, I will try to share my screen here and I will get going. So first of all, is it not sharing?
Not yet, no.
All right. Let me, okay, here we go.
There we go.
How about now? Okay, wonderful. So first of all, I wanted to thank staff, Jeff Adams in particular, for all of the hard work that he's put into this and for his initial recommendation of approval. You know, there was obviously a lot of care and thoroughness that went into the application. We feel very strongly that all of the criteria have been met, and And we believe that that was recognized by staff with their recommendation. I'm going to talk briefly about just wetland preservation. We heard a number of concerns that came up from the public in the two planning commission hearings about wetland preservation and protecting wetlands. And we want to make it abundantly clear that there are no impacts to wetlands. The proposal would avoid wetlands entirely. They would be fenced and protected in perpetuity, and a conservation covenant would be recorded over the wetland to ensure that there would be no impacts to wetland. Like I mentioned, there was a concern that came up late in the process with Planning Commission about the possibility of the stormwater system for these homes dewatering the wetland, and we're prepared to speak to that tonight. The next thing I wanted to point out is that we've brought in experts from across the board of all the issues that are affected by this, or all the issues within the code that are relevant to this project. There's geologic hazard, there's a geologic hazard overlay that comes into play. There are tree protection standards, there are wetlands. We have brought in geotechnical consultant. We brought in an arborist. We have John Van Staveren. And so we've brought in consultants with very special expertise on these issues. And one thing I'll point out as I run through the Planning Commission findings is that there's no technical basis for contrary findings to the evidence that we've presented. In particular when it comes to geologic hazards and wetlands that we'll speak to. The one exception to that is tree preservation, and the city brought in an arborist, and that arborist had comments on our initial proposal, which was to remove 11 trees. And at the very first hearing, with Planning Commission, he spoke to those concerns. We came back after that hearing and took a more refined look at the site plan and determined that by changing the building footprints, getting a little bit more specific, a little more clinical with the way that these homes and these sites could be developed, we were able to reduce that tree removal from 11 trees to 7 trees, which is a substantial reduction. And so we felt like we overwhelmingly met that criterion to consider tree removal. Over 80% of the trees on the site will be preserved, over 80%. So there will continue to be a substantial tree canopy on the site. And the applicant, we believe, has overwhelmingly met that requirement to consider tree removal. And the arborist in the city's arborist in that second hearing agreed that his concerns had been met, and that there had been a very good faith effort to reduce trees, and that the code was met. So one of the issues that Planning Commission cited as a concern for the approvability was the issue that there's a current plat restriction that obstructs access from Hemlock Street. And we wanted to point out that 2000 plat recording says very specifically that this restriction can be modified by the city. And we had discussions with city staff about this, about how this would play out, and agree with the initial staff report that a condition of approval can easily satisfy that requirement. And subsequent to a city decision on this issue, on the partition and conditional use request, we intend to submit that plat restriction request and process that. So that issue can very easily be addressed through a condition of approval. Planning Commission noted that they believe a clear and objective pathway is provided through the code. The issue with their finding and their reason behind that is that they're assuming that this is a request for a single dwelling, and it's not. This is a request for a partition. And so the approval path for a single dwelling is irrelevant to that requirement that the city must apply clear and objective standards in the regulation of housing development. And so we believe that the Planning Commission fundamentally erred in its finding in that regard. I mentioned geologic hazards. The Cannon Beach Municipal Code states that potential hazards, geologic hazards as mapped by the city, need to be investigated by a professional geologist or geotechnical engineer. And any potential hazards need to be mitigated to an acceptable level. There's not an assumption or a requirement that there's an absolute zero risk to construction in geologic hazard zones, only that sound geotechnical principles are integrated into the construction methods in order to mitigate that potential risk. We've provided evidence to that effect, and despite there not being any technical evidence to the contrary, Plan Commission disagreed with that. One thing that I want to point out is that this, hearkening back to this issue that the regulations of housing need to be clear and objective, this issue of what is an acceptable level is vague, it's undefined, and clearly is out of bounds with that requirement that the regulations need to be clear and objective. So we believe that in spite of this issue and in spite of their concerns that there's not an acceptable level of mitigation, and without any professional evidence to counter what we've presented, we believe that it's that standard is fundamentally not allowed to be a lens through which the application is reviewed. Planning Commission found that tree retention has not been considered, and I mentioned previously that we believe it was considered initially and even further considered through the improvements that we made to the site planning to make sure that we reduce the trees from the tree removal from 11 to 7, and the preservation of 80% of the trees on the site. Again, when we speak to this issue of what are clear and objective standards, the requirement to consider tree removal, it's not quantitative. There's no basis of measurement there. It's not a clear and objective standard. So we would argue, in spite of the fact that we believe that we meet that standard, that standard is shouldn't be considered applicable. Planning Commission found, and Mr. Adams mentioned this in his staff presentation, that there's no demand for housing and the site's not suitable for the use. And part of their assertion was that the site would be used for luxury homes or second homes, which is entirely speculative. It's irrelevant to the standard because as Mr. Adams mentioned, any housing is considered needed housing by the state. And the Oregon Housing Community Services Department has identified a demand for housing in the city, and the site was considered as suitable for housing in the Clatsop County Housing Strategy, which looked at buildable lands within the city. And again, not to sound like a broken record here, but this requirement for a clear and objective standards and a clear and objective framework for evaluating housing isn't met with this standard for identifying that there's a demand for housing at that location. It's a subjective standard. It's not clear and objective. Planning Commission stated that the use would create congestion on adjacent streets and overburden the system. The city's draft TSP identifies the system as meeting, the city system as meeting mobility targets. And Planning Commission acknowledged future trips were not likely to contribute to traffic on Hemlock in any meaningful way. And then again, this issue of clear and objective standards, this is not there's not a basis of measurement. It's not a clear and objective standard. I mentioned again, geologic hazards and this requirement that the hazard is mitigated to an acceptable level. We presented evidence from our geotechnical consultant with very specific mitigation measures that should be implemented with the project. Those would be conditions of approval, conditions of site construction, and we believe the standard is met. And again, in spite of that, it's that acceptable level is not a clear and objective standard. So in quick summary, and then I'll hand things off to John Van Staveren from Pacific Habitat Services. The application it's a needed housing application, and only clear and objective standards can be applied. The applicants provided substantial evidence that demonstrates the approval criteria are met, including technical evidence from the geotechnical consultant, arborist, wetland consultant, and Dow. No wetland or buffer impacts will occur, and conservation covenants will be established to ensure that the wetlands on site will be preserved and protected in perpetuity. And then lastly, that geologic hazards can be mitigated to an acceptable level. For all those reasons and the reasons I mentioned before, we believe that the Planning Commission has erred in their finding, and that the applicant's request should be approved. With that, I will hand things off to John Van Staveren and let him address this issue that has come up about a concern of draining the wetland. Thank you.
And Reed, can we get a copy of this? Send that to me, please. Your
Absolutely.
PowerPoint.
Absolutely.
Good evening, City Council members. My name is John Van Staveren. I am a senior professional wetland scientist with Pacific Habitat Services, and the address is 9450 Southwest Commerce Circle, Suite 180 in Wilsonville, 97070. I first visited the property in 1999 when we were hired by the property owners to conduct a wetland delineation, which we did. And then again before the recent delineation in 2020, when we conducted a wetland delineation, and I also visited the property numerous times in between those two dates, especially recently. The recent delineation was approved by the Department of State Lands and the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers. I'm very familiar with the property and the wetlands, obviously. The wetland actually was first identified on the city's local wetlands inventory, which was conducted in the early 1990s. That inventory made note of the fact that the wetland is connected to wetlands to the east, and also describe the wetland. This site is of low significance due to the extent of surrounding development that isolates it from other wetlands, and that isolation is from surface water. It's my educational, I've been in the business now for 32, 33 years, that what I've seen is that wetland is supported by groundwater. It certainly gets precipitation, obviously, and runoff from adjacent properties. But I do not believe that the Planning Commission is correct when they said that the construction of the three sites will drain the wetland. I'm actually not quite even sure what that means, because obviously it wouldn't drain the wetland. It would deprive the wetland of some water. But is that going to be significant? Is that going to deprive the hydrology of the wetland in order for it to continue to survive, sustain itself? The answer is no. And you can see here is a local wetland inventory that was done, like I said, under contract with the city. You can see how this is connected, the wetland, with wetlands to the east there on the other side of Hemlock, old Oregon Coast Highway. And what we believe is that there's a regional groundwater table there that's supporting this wetland, and then also wetlands to the east. So again, you've got a relatively small footprint from the proposed development. You've got a relatively large wetland. It's actually doing quite fine, even though it's adjacent to a very busy road, getting runoff from uplands. Yes, that's true. Probably untreated stormwater from Hemlock is going into it. But is the wetland going to be adversely impacted by the construction of these building sites? I would say no. And I'll entertain any questions you have.
We'll probably have questions when we get into our deliberations, so hang in there.
Sounds good.
Is there anybody else from your team that is saying anything, or is that the end of the presentation?
That's the end of the presentation. We're happy to answer any questions you have, though.
Okay, thanks, Reed.
Thank you.
Okay, we'll move to the next. Are there any presentations by proponents? Looking for little yellow hands. Okay. Are there presentations by opponents? Jen?
Jan Siebert Warmond and Wes Warmond, my husband. PO Box 778 Cannon Beach, Oregon 97110. Dear Mayor and City Councilors, we are giving you copies of the first 4 emails we mentioned in our letter, which we sent to all of you via email last night. The rest of the emails should already be in your packet. We request that all of this information be entered into the public record for this appeal. If you have any difficulty finding any of this, please just let us know. We would like to add tonight that it is our understanding the entire record of the Planning Commission hearings and all they entail are part of the appeal record. If that is not already the case, we request now that it be so. Thank you.
Thank you. And just so you know, we did receive an email. Got it right here.
Yes, and I hope I can get that to Jen.
Email?
I think she already has.
That's it.
No, I didn't receive it.
Oh,
You don't have it?
No.
Okay, so I'll get that to you.
Okay.
So one of the commissioner, counselors could forward that to,
I'm doing it right now.
okay.
Thank you.
That will make sure that gets into the record.
Anybody else would like to? Opposition, Sue?
Laram, PO Box 108, Cannon Beach. Dear Mayor, City Councilors, and staff. I would like to be put on the record as being in agreement with the Planning Commission's statement that, quote, the cumulative removal of stormwater from these uplands proposed by the utility plan will continue to degrade the historic adjacent wetland. The stormwater removal plan presented by the applicant will, in effect, drain the wetland. The evidence has made it clear the wetlands are essential to the health and viability of our community. I submit that these statements are basically all you need to know to deny this appeal. If I may, I'd like to quote from an article in Orion magazine called Sanctuary by Lacey M. Johnson. Quote, a forest of trees is more than a place where they grow, unquote. When a tree is cut down, the growth of the tree year by year is evidenced in the rings, which record the years of abundance of and lack of water. In these rings is a history of connection to the land that is longer than the history of the forest being logged or milled or even owned. We tend to accept that ownership of the land means we also own everything connected to it, all of the creeks and soil and trees and plants. But this is a relatively modern idea, one that evolved from the forceful transformation of land into wealth. That wealth has been concentrated in the hands of people whose power is expressed through the extent of what they own. Control of land consolidated power, but one condition of power is the ability to cede it. It's not too late for you, the city councilors of Cannon Beach, to deny this appeal based on the wisdom inherent in the Planning Commission's belief that altering the flow of water into these wetlands will cause irretrievable harm or even death of this valuable and valued ecosystem community. I hope I have also given you some new ideas to ponder. Please act with wisdom and compassion and deny this appeal.
Thank you, Sue. Next. Anybody? Do they have the hand raised yet? Nope.
Hi, yeah, this is Reed Stapleton again with Dow. So, Mrs.
Ray, hang on a second.
Okay,
You have a chance to rebut after everybody has a chance to speak.
I appreciate that. It sounds like there was written evidence submitted and we haven't seen that. So I'd request that we have an opportunity to review that before there's any rebuttal.
So,
Guess that email, I don't know.
I can-
move forward and Jen will, actually, if she's going to send him
I emailed it to you, Jen. That would help.
the material that was submitted.
Email it to you.
Right.
So I email it to you, or I don't know if that would make it easier.
Yeah, if you send it to me.
Oh, Jeff, okay.
Thank
Hang
you.
on a second.
I appreciate it.
Yep.
Mayor, what she is copying was the information that was just submitted by Ms. Blair, and not the stuff that you had, somebody else has spoken about before.
Oh, okay.
That's why it's being copied now.
Okay, there's more. Interesting issue. Anybody else?
I have a question.
Question?
One more. This hearing is to address draining of the wetland. And I'm not sure, question is Jan Seaver Gorman's submittal address items outside of this hearing?
So there's two aspects of the hearing. One is the various issues that were identified in Dowell's appeal and a variety of different things. In addition, and arguments can be submitted one way or the other on any of those. In addition, you allowed new evidence specifically about the draining of the wetlands. And I understand that Siebert Warman's emails are emails from staff and the applicant, I believe, are already in the record anyway. And so it's really, it's not new evidence. It's more argument about what was happening and whether or not you should find that grant the appeal or not.
I just want to make sure that was.
Yeah, no, I appreciate that. That's make sure that we get it right too and don't make a procedural mistake that'll come back to hurt us. Yes.
Okay, last call for opponents. Okay, is there any staff response? Okay, that brings us to Reed. If there's any statements that you would wish to make, you're welcome to now.
I think I heard that they want a chance to review the new written materials, so
Okay.
I won't speak, well, here he is, he can speak.
Yeah, that's exactly right. I appreciate it. We don't want to take too much time, but we'll need about 10 minutes just to review that email and be able to come back with thoughts on it. If that is acceptable.
But we could ask Jeff to talk for 10 minutes.
Yeah, we have Georgia football. We're
It's new. Okay, at that point, we will take a short recess.
So about 10 minutes, come back, it's what, 6:44, come back at 6:54?
6:54 it is. Back in session, and we were at the point where the appellant can make his statements, final statements. Reed, go ahead.
Thank you. I appreciate that. Appreciate the time to review that. So in looking through the email chain is related to a public stormwater line in Hemlock Drive that currently outfalls into the applicant's property. And there have been side discussions not related to this application, not a part of this application, about eliminating that outfall to the site and finding an alternate route for that stormwater. It's not a part of this application. It's an entirely independent issue from this application. The wetland that's been delineated on the site is based on current conditions, based on hydrology on the site. We're acknowledging the wetland boundary as it exists today. We're proposing to protect it as it exists today. And so the elimination of that outfall would have no bearing on the area proposed for preservation or the permanent wetland area that would be preserved on the site. And so we don't feel like that email has any bearing on the criteria whatsoever. And I don't think we have any further comment related to that. Oh, and I guess the other thing I'd add to that is just as John Van Stavern noted earlier, through his observations, that wetland is primarily groundwater fed and due to a high water table, not from surface water. And so, we would assume that eliminating that outfall isn't probably going to make much difference whatsoever on the wetland boundaries on the site. But it's a moot point because we're proposing to protect it as it exists today.
And I would note that correspondence with C20 and the packet of June 23rd before the Planning Commission, and questions where that came from.
Okay.
So I don't think we have any further comment, but we're happy to be available to answer any questions you have.
Okay.
Thank
Sure,
you.
there will be some. At that, I will close the public hearing and we'll open it up for consideration for the council. Start with?
I have a question for Reed, or actually, John Severn. John, can you hear me?
Yes, I can.
This is Mike Benfield. In looking at your history of the wetlands and working with the applicant, was any consideration given to just allow the storm drain from the structures to be directed directly into the wetland, which is what's encouraged by our ordinance unless there's an alternative?
Yeah, Reed, actually we'll have Reed or Matt weigh in on that, whether that was a consideration.
It's possible. the city standards would require a conditional use permit for that. If it went directly into the wetland. I'm looking over here. I'm in the same room as Matt. I don't know if that'd be the case if it's to a upland drainage site. Yeah, so I think the code is, and maybe Mr. Adams can correct me if I'm wrong. I think the the code is silent on whether or not that conditional use is triggered by an actual pipe in the wetland or something that's just upland of the wetland, but drains into the wetland, is our understanding on that.
I agree with that. Yeah.
Okay, the reading of the ordinance, the drainage, storm drainage should continue to follow its natural course unless it goes across somebody's property, in which case you need to run a line to a storm drain, storm sewer. But each of your lots are adjacent to a wetland. And in my reading, it just says that you should allow the surface water from that development to continue to flow into the wetland.
I will actually continue on Mike's vein here and ask John a couple of questions. I'm going to start with what Reed just mentioned earlier, was about the fact that this is groundwater and not surface fed.
It's both groundwater and surface fed.
Okay. The other one is in the comment about the fact that this wetland will be drained by the planning commission. Obviously, that's an exaggeration about draining it, but wouldn't, even though we might have just solved the problem, but wouldn't the a added reduction degrade it more?
No, I don't think so. I mean, you know, the wetland itself has been so impacted in the past. I mean, obviously the construction of Old Highway 101 and Hemlock right there, obviously severed. It was I'm sure it was a much larger wetland historically. But no, I don't think so. I mean, you are out there when you have been in the wetland, gone right in the heart of the wetland, when you have standing water. That standing water is not coming from surface water. That's coming from groundwater. And when you see the elevation of the wetland, it's quite low compared to the surrounding land. And so what you have there is a regional groundwater table that is above the surface of the ground. So that comes up in the wintertime and the spring when you have a lot of precipitation, because it's coming not just from the surrounding area, but also from even areas to the east of the road. And so that's the primary source of water, is groundwater. Depriving the wetland of that water that's coming from those wetlands, you know, that's part of the budget, as we call it, the hydrologic budget of the wetland. But will it drain the wetland? Absolutely no, will not drain the wetland. Will it degrade the wetland? I would say no. That wetland has, you know, withstood the standard of time and the disturbances that humans have placed at it, you know, with the roads and the construction of houses, etc. And I think it will continue to survive.
But it's a percentage degrading, because if one house or three houses that have already been built in the uplands has dried it out a little bit, three more would dry it out a little bit more.
Well, I actually agree with you, but if you take that stance, then you would not have development in the city or anywhere else. As a wetland, you know, biologist, scientist, the source of, you either have a groundwater table or a combination of groundwater and surface water. You can imagine, you know, lots being constructed, and they're doing a good job of avoiding wetlands in other locations. I'm not just talking about Cannon Beach, but elsewhere. You know, all of those developments will have to be reviewed to see whether they're depriving the adjacent wetlands of hydrology. And yes, I agree with you. It could be depriving wetlands of hydrology. But that's really a study. I mean, that's a study that would dwarfs this project, you know. So will it have some incremental impact? Sure, absolutely. No doubt about it. But Will it be detrimental to the survival of the wetland? I say no.
Isn't it kind of the natural life cycle for a pond style wetland like this to eventually fill in with tree debris and become a drier land? I mean, that's over a longer generations, I understand, but isn't it that's the natural cycle?
Well, it depends on the type of wetland, and I don't know. I mean, obviously, there's a lot of debris in the wetland from the, you have willows, is basically a willow shrub wetland there. Will the wetland dry out? Not necessarily. I mean, there has to be some reason why the ground is increasing then in height, and then therefore draining or having a greater distance from the groundwater below it. And I don't see that happening here.
Yeah, I do, I guess. I'm not a scientist, I have to admit, this is just common sense observation. I've observed that property since 1962, and I've been in that property when the wetland was going over Forest Lawn Road. Water was flowing over it.
Right.
So I know that it is drying. It is more than obvious. So I guess that's where I'm running into the fact that a little percentage more decline is concerning to me. Granted, if we've just solved the problem by draining the roof drains into the wetland, you've negated the fact that you're losing water. I just want to be clear that there would be some degradation because of new construction.
Well, so if I may, you're discussing wetland flooding across the road, which I'm sure happens when you have a high, precipitation event. That happens with everything. But I thought what you were saying is that the wetland is drying out because it's, as you said, a natural succession there that would actually the elevation of the wetland would grow or be higher, which I don't see happening. The wetland has been, like I said, impacted for many, many years by adjacent development. Is there an incremental difference? Absolutely. I'm sure there is from those 3 lots, but is it significant? In my mind, it's not.
Okay, and I also agree that it would be concerning that if we declared all wetlands now being drained by nearby construction as a problem, that makes sense. But it gets to a point when you're running out of wetlands that you need to save what you've got left. So that's where I'm at with that. Kind of off topic, I know. What we're talking about here is the partition, but I think the wetland aspect is very important.
Can I ask how much standing water is there on average in the wetland? And is it a seasonal situation or is it a constant standing water?
No, well, I've observed about up to 2 feet, 18 inches in that depth. It's definitely seasonal. It would not be in the summertime for sure. I will say one thing too, is that you bring up a good point about saving wetlands and, the local wetland inventory. In fact, I've managed actually more Goal 5 wetland inventories than anyone else in the state. And those are there for a specific reason, because you want to make sure that you protect your Goal 5 resources. And this was not a significant wetland when the wetland inventory was conducted.
Question for Karen.
Sure.
I have a question either for Jeff, but I think for Karen. And that is the storm drain that currently is in Forest Lawn Road. I think it discharges into the wetland. Is that correct?
No, not directly into the
The
wetland.
drawings you showed it sort of.
I don't think into the mapped wetland. I can verify. Let me look and see.
I was trying to figure out where that water's going now.
Utility plan. It shows it, I believe, on the utility plan.
while Jeff is looking for that, I'm gonna also make a comment on what Reed said about the fact that the storm drain has no bearing on this. It kind of does a little bit, because if it's draining into the wetland, it's maintaining health of the wetland. And that should be the property owner's concern.
That's kind of what I'm getting to. Where does it drain?
Now, if it is,
I thought it went back into the wetland, but
Well, and if the wetland was minimized, would they be re-looking at it every 5 years to do a new delineation? So are you setting yourself up to create more land with that situation?
No, we've agreed to a condition of approval through the planning commission process that would record that covenant on the plat. And so that the boundaries of that wetland and the covenant that protects it and requires fencing would all be required by the plat and would be fixed on that plat. And regarding the outfall not being pertinent, it's not a part of this proposal to remove that. That's a completely separate process, separate issue. So, if that's happening on a different path, that's its own issue, it's its own process. We haven't developed this plan under the assumption that it's happening. We've delineated the wetland based on current condition. And so that's what I meant by the fact that it really doesn't have any bearing on this, because it's not a part of this application.
Yeah, and like I said, that outlet is out in the right of way, which is outside of the wetland delineation.
okay,
I thought I saw it right off the east side of the road.
Yeah, but that is moved, the wetland has moved more towards the east. From the old wetland study, the original study. And so if you want to look at the utility plan.
Well, I understand it's not part of this
Yeah.
application, but it seems to me to address the question, issue came up about draining the wetland. And it looks to me like even if it's not discharging across the boundary of the wetland, it's discharging in that direction. And water runs downhill. So I guess what I'm seeing, and I don't have the full engineering drawings, what I'm seeing is that putting water into that storm drain doesn't take water, the upstream, the uphill water away from the wetlands. It just redirects it back potentially into the wetlands. So
Yeah, at a different point.
that's why I don't think it's terribly relevant, but it's relevant to the argument if the wetlands are being drained by diverting rain gutters into the storm sewer. If the storm sewer discharges adjacent to the wetland.
Yeah, it isn't, it's not, like Reed said, even as the proposed one that was not approved, that still would not, because we're not moving it to a new area, it's still going to be in that area.
Yeah, okay.
I have a question about the covenant for the wetland. Can you tell me who would be responsible for preserving that wetland with that agreement, with that covenant? And then I am also concerned about fencing. What kind of fencing are you talking about?
Yeah, well, I guess to answer the first question, the covenant would, it would require the property owner to they would ultimately be the stewards of that area that would be off limits for foot traffic or trespassing. There'd be signs that would be placed at the border of that area and I think we've offered a specific sign as a condition of approval through the planning commission process. I can't recall if that got incorporated, but we could offer that again. As far as fencing, typically you'd see like a split rail fencing, something that would clearly demarcate the boundary, and in combination with that sign, prevent people or certainly warn people not to go into that area.
I think we've found in the past that if we don't have some sort of timeline where things are checked, that everyone loses track. And so I would hope we could set up some sort of an awareness every year or so to make sure that things are going the way they should go.
Yeah, it doesn't sound like there's any kind of feedback, I guess, right now established to make sure that that wetland is preserved.
That's kind of the problem with the dunes.
Yeah.
We never got reports back.
Yeah.
And another project I can think of. So.
Any other concerns, comments?
One thing that I'll offer as maybe food for thought in your consideration deliberation is this issue about the downspouts from the houses, and our current plan to hard pipe those to the city system. When we were considering, does that water go on site or does it go to laterally to the city system? We had this notion that going on site to the wetland would trigger a conditional use. I think we could look at a scenario where we are, where that water is coming out from the downspout to some sort of swale at the site that would keep that hydrology on the site, but not constitute really a point source discharge. I believe that we could do that, and I've been talking with Matt here, considering that, and I think that might help alleviate that concern about taking that hydrology offsite, but also not discharging that water into the buffer or the wetland such that the conditional use would be triggered.
One of the other points that was brought up was the geological hazards. Any comments on that? Okay.
I think the geological hazards for that site, I mean, I live on hills, so I live east of that site. And I think they're pretty much the same from throughout town, at least according to what I'm reading in the application. And from my observation, I'm not horribly concerned about that any more than I am about any place else here.
I agree, because my house is on a very similar geology, because it has that pebble clay barrier down deep underneath it. Trees, I think that's a hard one. They stated that they have changed from 11 to 7, obviously an improvement. The concept to me of preserving trees means you start with 0, you don't cut anything, and you do your best to not cut anything. But when you're building a house, obviously trees get in the way, and it's hard to put foundations in without cutting roots. So there will be loss in that situation. The fact that it's not a clear and objective, that just irks me. I think it's very clear. 0, you don't cut trees. But it becomes something that when you have a building permit that is allowed, there is some give and take that happens. What I would be asking is that the property owners strongly start considering planting and soon, so that the older trees that are there can be cover for the new trees that are coming up. I am continually disappointed with arborists. Arborists tend to be, sorry, a lot like lawyers. They go on one side or the other. And they fight for that side. One thing I do notice that they quite often forget to talk about is the strength of a grove. When you have a grove of trees, they protect each other. When you start cutting down a few of the trees in the grove, the others get harmed. They will not last as long, especially in some of our windstorms. So that concerns me, especially when you take a middle swath kind of thing, and you can see when you look at their tree plan, that means the ones on either side of that swath have lost a wind barrier. Not much that I can comment on about how this affects this partition. It just disappoints me that arborists don't pay more attention to that. Standing on my soapbox again.
Jeff, is there any way that we could require the replacement of those trees, but at a certain size, so that they're not the little tiny baby trees, but they're fairly large tree to replace the trees that are coming down?
This is outside the kind of subdivision requirements, so it, I guess it's a condition that you can go that way, but it's not something that we really have in our criteria there. At this,
So you're saying we could, but there's nothing to regulate them doing it?
no, I just, it's not in our code for that. Yeah.
I thought in the building permit, not,
We're not there. That's at a building permit.
I think in the building permit, you can require, I think there are some height and diameter requirements on trees being planted.
Yeah, there's 6 foot has to be 6 feet.
Okay.
Anybody else? I'm going to go to the last topic. One last point that I think is, for me, the clear and objective point. That's the access from Hemlock. I will support the Planning Commission on that part. So all of the other ones I have challenges with supporting. I agree with the council that clear and objective is not always reached by our codes. We need to work on that. We are trying to. But the access off Hemlock is clear. And I could not accept the partition. Let me get this right. Accept the partition on a hope that someday it might change. Or we might change on our ideal of keeping that stretch of Hemlock free of any new access points. Where I'm at.
And I agree with that too. I think there's enough activity. In fact, we're just trying to, with our TSP plan, to create a 4-way stops and all of the different things that are congesting that area. And I agree with you, Sam.
We're also getting more pedestrian traffic, more bike lanes. So again, and part of our comprehensive plan is to reduce access to Hemlock. So, and it's in the plat.
Well, it's also very near Sunset and Hemlock, which is the worst intersection. We get an F on that already.
Yeah.
And the backup of the traffic in that area can be pretty big. And it's, the S curves are just south of that too, so I have some problems with putting more entrance ways out of Hemlock, from Hemlock,
Well,
anywhere.
There are reasons to limit
Yeah.
the access from Forest Lawn. And those reasons are still there, maybe even more severe now than they were back 1999.
Yeah.
Or 2000, I guess 2000.
At that, Bill, where are we for making a decision?
I think I heard a majority opposed to waiving the access requirement when that later comes back, and sort of, in my mind, that what I'm hearing is that they don't have the access that's been laid out on their partition plan. And so, that may be sufficient, if that's the case, then I don't see a way that you could approve the application based on what's in front of you.
Okay.
So that's where the majority is. I guess I'd say, so we've got the access issue. I've heard from the mayor on the other issues. I'm not certain we necessarily need to address all of them if in fact, the access is not doable. But that's really the question is, do you want to address, adopt the planning commission decision and supplement it with additional discussion of the access? Do you want to just say, based on access alone, we don't think this is appropriate, and sort of how far do you want to go with your decision? Because the appeal raises multiple issues, and if in fact access is it, then we can look at that, or we can address the other issues.
I personally would reject the application solely on the basis of access to Hemlock. I tend to agree with the applicant on a number of the other points, not all, but a number of them. But if the application is going to be rejected, the access is clear and objective. And it to me is reason enough to reject the application. And I'm not saying uphold the planning commission's decision, because their decision addressed a whole raft of issues. But if we reject on one point, I don't feel like we need to address all those other issues. That's just my opinion. I think where planning commission felt some of those points weren't compelling, I felt they were. So
Mayor, I noticed that Mr. Stapleton has his hand up. I don't think you necessarily need to hear from him, our deliberations. You've had ongoing discussions. It's really up to the council.
Yeah, the hearing is closed, so unless we have a question for the applicants, and I don't hear any, so. At that, they want to make a motion.
am I willing to tackle it?
Go ahead.
I would move to reject the applicant's application partitioning the wetland laudable, record on the basis of the plat restriction, any access onto Hemlock Street.
Second,
Okay. Does that make sense to everybody?
Could you repeat that again?
I doubt it.
So what I heard Councilor Benefield say was that he moves to deny the application and eventually deny the appeal as well, based on the plat restriction that prevents access as proposed, the Hemlock as proposed in the application.
Yeah, I should clarify, deny the appeal as well as the application, but on the basis of the access to Hemlock.
Okay. Jennifer?
Council President Benefield,
Yes.
Councilor Risley,
yes.
Councilor Ogilvy,
Yes.
Councilor McCarthy,
Yes.
Mayor Stidel.
Yes.
Okay, brief procedural issue. The 120-day deadline on this application, I believe expires on Friday.
Saturday.
Okay. So what I'd want to do is issue a decision by the end of the week. I know that in the past, we have brought findings back for you to review. That's a really short timeline. This is a relatively simple issue. You know, I know when Ryan was here, a lot of time you would delegate to Ryan to draft the findings and you'd be happy with them. We can do that if you want to delegate to Jeff and I to develop findings, or if one of you wants to, you know, perhaps delegate to one of the commissioners to review them, that works too. Or we can have a special meeting later this week for you to review them.
Oh.
Yeah, I didn't think that was
Pretty
active option, and given how short the timeline is, you know, delegation, whether it's just Jeff and me or Jeff and me and one or two of the counselors to review.
Okay. I'm okay with delegating it myself. I'm okay with delegating it to Jeff with the understanding that the applicant did propose that we approve the application on the consideration that they would then address the access problem. I see that as backwards. So that's why I can't approve the partitioning until I know the access is secured or there is a design of some kind that works. So it's better that they ask for the access part first and then ask for the partition. So if that helps in the findings. Anything else?
Other than to say I agree with that, Sam.
Thank you.
Helpful to know.
And so then you guys will write up the findings and we're good. Do we need
So
to
it's
vote?
delegated to Bill and Jeff.
Okay.
And then you'll email.
Yeah. Based on what we heard tonight, we'll pull together some findings and mail out, issue the decision by the end of the week and make sure we email a copy to the council so that they have an opportunity to review.
Okay, great. Okay, at that, I lost my care. Hang on. Page 1. Okay, we're done with that. So anything for good of the order?
One thing that I noticed is that on our agenda the other night, we were supposed to discuss the Nicholson project and the wall. And we just breezed over it. And I'm thinking that should be addressed. That was a planning commission thing.
Don't remember.
I
the
don't remember
discussion at
seeing
all.
it either, no. That's why we-
It's a planning commission.
Oh, the planning commission.
And I just would like to bring it up that that whole topic wasn't addressed, and I think in a future meeting it should be.
Okay.
Shouldn't that be a planning commission discussion first?
Are you referring to the group meeting?
Yeah, but no, it was a planning commission meeting.
Oh.
So
I think Lisa
I
was.
guess I'm confused on this. Are you saying that you guys want living wall brought to you guys
Well,
or?
I'm not saying that.
No, I just think that that whole topic was ignored.
Was on, a report was given to them and they didn't say anything or didn't request anything on that, so. Lisa, I think, said something about it, but that was it.
I saw a copy of that report.
Yeah.
For the planning commission.
The planning commission.
Okay, she's right there.
Yep.
So it's just a presentation and then
Yeah,
To the planning commission.
uh-huh.
Well, there was a report, and so, that's usually we give them a report, and I think it was late at night, and I think Lisa said something about it, but that was all that was mentioned. Nobody else was interested in it.
okay.
Okay.
At that, then we are